All right. So I'll be here if you need anything.
Thank you so much.
And Danita is just who set up the room, right?
Yep, she's logged in. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Let's try to share the screen.
All right.
Let's see if that works. Do you want to share the desktop?
Oh, instead of just sharing that? Yeah, we can do that.
There you go.
All right. Let's see.
Oh, I like this.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay. Well, good morning. My name is Jordan Pearce. I'm a first-year doctoral student at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia.
And I'm Bianca Augustine. I'm also a first-year doctoral student in counselor education and supervision here at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia.
Today we're going to be talking about something that comes up a lot for us as practitioners, even those of us who might not specialize in working with youth or specialize with working with the LGBTQ community, and that is understanding the needs of LGBTQ youth in our communities. Even if we're not working with them directly, we're working with their friends, their family members, their teachers. We're supporting and advocating for them in our communities through policy initiatives. And so we feel deeply about this topic and feel that it is something that applies to anyone working in counseling or counselor education.
All right, so we'll get started. Okay, so 42% of LGBTQ report a lack of acceptance of LGBTQ individuals in their communities. And that includes them hearing negative views about the LGBTQ community from their peers, reading about it and seeing it on the internet, especially now that social media is so prevalent in the lives of our youth, as well as at school. And at school, they're not only hearing these negative comments and connotations and views about the LGBTQ community from their peers, they're also hearing it from adults that are working at the schools as well. So when working with these youth, it's really important that we keep in mind how some of the individuals who are most influential in their lives, who they see day in and day out at their schools, are individuals who are not supportive of them and individuals who are making comments that are very hurtful to them as well.
We know from the research that LGBTQ youth are at a greater risk for a lot of the harmful factors that we see in a lot of clients. We know that they are more likely to be diagnosed with a mental health concern. We know that they experience academic obstacles, which can include being bullied in a school setting, being discriminated against in a school setting. There are lots of cases out that I'm sure that we've all heard of students wanting to use the name that they are choosing to use the pronouns that they want to use, to be able to have access to gendered spaces in their schools, like restrooms or changing rooms, or participate in gendered activities like sports. This can lead to issues of doing poorly in school, not participating fully in school.
Truancy, so not attending school because it isn't a positive environment for them as well.
Definitely. And there's even research out of the University of Georgia that tells us that LGBT people in general actually suffer urinary tract infections more frequently than the general population because of lack of access to public restrooms, perceived lack of safety. So this is impacting LGBTQ youth in ways that you may not even consider. We also know that LGBTQ youth are more at risk for homelessness. They have a greater risk of being involved in the child welfare system. And we know from the data that they are likely to engage in risky behaviors, drugs, alcohol, risky sexual behaviors at a greater rate than their non-LGBTQ plus peers. We also know that they experience intimate partner violence and dating.
Bianca, you're muted. Can you unmute?
That was weird. Okay.
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Okay. But y'all were able to hear everything Jordan said?
Okay, that's weird.
Okay, that is weird.
Okay. We're going to roll with the technology.
Yeah.
Today.
So it's also important that we keep in mind that in some states, it's not mandatory that sex education is incorporated into the school curriculum. And even where it is incorporated into the school curriculum, it's normally very, very heteronormative. So that means that our LGBTQ youth aren't learning about safe sex practices as they apply to them. So that's something to keep in mind as well as the heteronormativity, tongue-tied this morning.
Heteronormativity.
There we go. Okay. Thank you. Teamwork of the curriculums in school in general. So it's rare, if ever, that LGBTQ youth get to hear about influential individuals that are part of the LGBTQ community. So they're hearing and learning almost nothing, if anything, about LGBTQ history. So that's something that impacts them as well. Okay, so some of the other unique needs of LGBTQ youth is the support that they require in navigating the coming out process. And it's important that we keep in mind that the coming out process is going to be different for each individual LGBTQ youth. Also, the coming out process is not just a one-time occurrence. They don't just come out one time and then they're done and the world knows. They're coming out over and over again throughout the rest of their lives. They're coming out to family members and coming out to different family members at different times often, coming out to friends and peers at different times, coming out if they choose to at jobs in their future. So each time they encounter a new population of individuals or a new individual, they have part of that coming out process starting all over again. So it's important that we're helping and supporting them in navigating that difficult time for them. They also, in addition to all of the pressures and lack of understanding and misconceptions that come along with being an adolescent and being a youth in today's society. On top of that, our LGBTQ youth also have a lack of understanding from their peers and other individuals in the community regarding pronouns. So like Jordan mentioned earlier, people not calling them by the pronouns that they go by. It's also important that we're using language that advocates for them. So instead of referring to it as preferred pronouns or their preferred name, referring to it as their pronouns and their name. Because by using that word preferred, it implies that it's up to whoever's speaking to them whether or not they use those pronouns and that name. And that's not the case. You can call me by some other name other than Bianca, what I introduce myself as and what I go by. So it should be the same for our LGBTQ youth. And helping them to navigate that and cope with the lack of understanding from those around them. So we're going to talk a little bit more later on about things that we can do in our practices to help make sure that these things are normalized and that we're providing a safe environment where we are using the pronouns and the name that they go by. A lot of these youth also face a lack of family and peer support. So in addition to people not fully understanding them and their experiences, they also experience not having the support system that their peers, their heterosexual peers might have. So helping them navigate that and helping provide support for them so they do have some area, some individual that does provide support for them. And helping them to cope with that lack of support from the people closest to them. Also, we have to be mindful that their cultural and or religious expectations might come into conflict with their sexual or gender identity. So how do they navigate that? How do they navigate that their life is something very different than what their culture or their religion expects from them? So kind of being at odds with that. That's something that we have to be mindful as well. And that goes into the multicultural aspect of this.
So we've given this presentation before. This is the first time we're doing it virtually. So we adapted an activity that we do when we are doing this for people in person. It's an interactive activity. So we're going to see how this works in a virtual setting, and we're going to be hopeful that it will be just as meaningful as it has been when we've done this in person. I'm just curious, I want to check in. I know that we've had a couple of people join us. I'm wondering if anyone would be willing to introduce themselves or to say just maybe what brought them to our presentation today, maybe what their role is in the counseling community. And remember to unmute yourself if you are wanting to speak, just in case.
Hello, this is Dr. Lorianne Stretch. I'm the department chair for the CMHC program, and I am also an ally of a transgender child of mine, and really value this type of information being disseminated so that my child can face a world that is inclusive and supportive and loving and nurturing of them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stretch. We really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for hosting this conference.
Yes, I'm so excited. I love it. It's one of my favorite projects.
Great. That's exciting.
This is fun. And the travel expenses were very manageable. That's always good.
Totally.
Is there anyone else who'd like to introduce themselves that has joined us? Maybe just share something brief about who you are in the counseling community and what maybe interested you about our topic. Okay. And that's okay.
Yeah.
We know that this is being recorded and is being shared with people who are going to not watch this in real time. And so it's perfectly okay to watch and observe. So what we're going to do is Bianca and I are going to walk through facilitating. What we typically do when you do this in person is that we will break the room up into 2 groups, and each of us will facilitate with one of the groups. But today we're going to facilitate together. And so this activity really explores what we bring to our role in the counseling world, and really speaks to what assumptions we're making based on our experiences, where our blind spots are as far as certain populations of people, and really looking at our biases and how they can impact the work that we do with all clients, not just clients in the LGBTQ plus community. But this is definitely has shown to be a really interesting and fruitful activity. And so this is something that we developed, and so I hope that you enjoy it. So Bianca, do you want to kind of tell them what we're going to do?
Yes. So we're going to introduce a client to you. You're going to get a little bit more information about the client as we move on. But at each step of us introducing the client to you, if you're able to unmute yourself, that'd be great. We're going to talk a little bit about how we would conceptualize this client's case. And what would be some of the first things that we might want to explore with this client based on the information that we have at that time.
Yeah, I know a lot of us work in environments where we don't have the luxury of an extensive intake process before we see a client. I know that I've personally had clients that I knew their name and maybe 4 words about their case, and then walked into a room to do counseling with them. And so I think this will be fun to kind of look at this case piece by piece. Sorry.
All right.
So we're going to conceptualize this together. So we do know that we have a new client today that we're going to be working with. And we know that this client is 15 years old.
So far, knowing that our client is 15, what would be some of the first things that we might think about and want to explore with this client?
I know something that comes up for me with I have a background of working with adolescents. I know at 15, identity development is a big part of the process. Who am I as I'm transitioning into being more of an adult, more independent? I know sex and dating are a big part of this time frame for folks. Maybe exploring sexuality through things that are being found on the internet.
What they hear from peers.
Definitely. And having more of an independent identity on social media too, and being able to connect with people outside of their family and friend groups. Anything else that kind of comes to mind when you think of a client who's 15?
Like, who's the support system for that? 15.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Keisha. Good job.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Assessing who are the people in this person's life. Are they at home with parents? Are they in a foster situation? What's the school situation look like?
Do they have any connections, any strong connections or relationships with family members, or are their peers their main source of support? Do they have any friends? Do they rely more on teachers and school personnel as a form of support? Those sorts of things.
I know too, this is a time when adolescents are starting to really question for the first time some cultural and religious norms that have been introduced, and really starting to think, I've been raised with this, and this is how I've always thought the world is, but I'm being exposed to all these new things that are telling me that might not be true for me. And so going back to really some very fundamental identity questions.
As well as starting to kind of recognize and evaluate their own values, and kind of dissociate their values from that of family or caretakers, whoever those primary adults in their lives might be. So kind of starting to reject some of the values of others and take on their own values and own those. Anything else anyone want to add? All right.
Let's add another piece of the puzzle.
Okay. So we also find out that our 15-year-old is a female. What might we, there we go, want to explore now that we know the gender of our client?
And would this change maybe some of the things that we were thinking about when we just knew their age?
Right. So one thing that comes to mind for me when I'm thinking that not only is this individual 15, not only are they an adolescent, but they're also female, is the impact that media might play on their self-image. So how do they view themselves? What else might we think about?
I know that personally for me, and this is a blind spot and a bias that I've had to work through, is thinking that female adolescent clients are more prone to self-harm or to disordered eating or to suicidal ideation, and then realizing that that's really a cultural stereotype that's been ingrained in me as someone who is male presenting and someone who identifies as male, that's something that I know now through working with adolescents, that this is not something that only females, but I know that going into my master's program, this was something that I might have assumed that I would be assessing for with a female client that I might not with a male 15-year-old.
Right. And very similarly, one thing that we also tend to kind of think of more quickly with a female client than we would with a male client, if they mention anything negative about their body, we start thinking about eating disorders, which we might not do if it were a male client. So another blind spot and social and cultural stereotype that we have to be mindful of when working with young females. Is there anything else that her being female might add to this for us?
Let's go ahead and add another dimension.
All right.
What times are we supposed to be wrapping up?
11. Okay. So now we also know that our 15-year-old female lives in a suburban area. How might this change what we were previously conceptualizing, or what might we add to that?
Did someone was wanting to say something? Remember to unmute yourself if you want to participate. I know I'm thinking of access to resources, suburban versus rural versus urban. Maybe a bias that I have is that suburban areas are more affluent,
yes,
and less So this might be somebody who has more access to financial resources, but I know that that's not necessarily true. And that's a cultural bias that we definitely have. Melanie is sharing with us social outlets, definitely, especially when we're thinking of certain groups. That's okay. We now, surprise, we know that our client is raised by a single mother in the suburbs.
Yes.
But definitely social outlets, is there access to friends, to maybe mentors, religious communities? Are there after school activities?
Supports.
Definitely.
Yeah, and then when I think suburban, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Lorianne again. One of the questions I have is, what is the presenting issue? Like, what is she coming in to counseling for? And also, you say she's female. Does she identify as female? I mean, I know she identifies as female. Is she biologically female? Is she, there's some of the questions that are coming up for me is, what else?
Yeah,
and what's bringing her to counseling?
Right.
Yeah,
so some questions of wanting to kind of know more. And this might be something, you're kind of looking at the intake that you're getting. I know I've worked in settings where the intake is done by other people. And so I get kind of, a document that's filled out and seeing some of these things. And definitely, I know I've had questions of like, I know this is what intake is saying the presenting concern is, but I'm wondering if that's accurate. I wonder if I'll get more information or different information.
Absolutely.
It says my client is female, but is that bio-female or female presenting? As those questions come up.
Yeah, those are all very good questions and very good points, Dr. Stretch.
We also know now, thanks to technology, that the client was raised by a single mother. And so I'm wondering if there are any assumptions that we make as clinicians when we know that a client is coming in who is from a single parent home, if there's something that might pop up for us based on our training or our experiences.
Also, what might pop up for us as far as the fact that the single parent is a mother as opposed to a father, how might that make things a little bit different as well? Any thoughts?
Just that she may have the resentment towards either or. So that may be some issues that she's having coming in to counseling.
Yeah, absolutely. So resentment towards one or both of the parents about them not being together. Absolutely. Something else that comes up for me is her having more independence and more autonomy at age 15 than other 15-year-olds might not have, being that she may or may not have had to be a little bit more independent, being that she has one parental figure instead of two.
Right. She might have some more access to, family dynamics, family financial situations. There might be some maturity that has had to come into the picture prematurely, ironically, premature maturity based on that situation.
Right.
But obviously that's not the case for everyone in a single parent home. Let's add another piece. Just we want to be mindful of time as we go through this. Okay. So now we're knowing that they've experienced some bullying in school. And so we're wondering if maybe this is bringing up some thoughts for you.
I think y'all are explaining who my foster kid is right now.
Oh, really? So this is really resonating with your experience, Keisha.
Yeah, I'm trying to separate it and just kind of go with the activity, but I'm like, you're kind of pulling out everything here.
Okay.
But as clinicians, we pull on our own experiences. That's the basis for, how we develop empathy for our clients and how we advocate for them by joining with them in some of these struggles and knowing some of these experiences from our own experience.
Yeah, it also helps us to normalize some of their experiences for them, help them to understand that, what you're going through, other people go through it too, as well as you're not alone in this. So helping to kind of normalize that as well. Yeah. So, based on your experiences, Keisha, if you'd like to share, if the child hasn't bullied at school, what are some other aspects that might add to counseling?
Distrust in people, distrust in adults. Specifically, that one of the children that I have was bullied, but it was more by adults than the kids in the school. So
yeah, and I think you bring up an important aspect that we tend to ignore. We automatically assume that bullying at school means it's bullying by peers. That's not necessarily the case. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
I'm also wondering, what it brings up for me is what kind of advocacy am I as a clinician maybe going to be able to do with the school system or with teachers? I'm curious now about the school environment.
Right.
I want to know, is there a school counselor that's involved? If not, why not? Maybe the school doesn't have a school counselor, and we know that's the reality for a lot of schools.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, are the parents involved in this?
Absolutely.
Or is her parent involved in this, or other parents involved? Are there, what's been done before?
Also, being that the child is being bullied at school, do they have peers that support them at school? Or are they facing this all alone 5 days a week for about 8 hours a day? Are they being bullied and kind of separated from their peers and not having any allies or anyone else to lean on or support them in this? What else might we think of with all of this that we have so far?
Anything else anyone wants to share?
Okay, let's add another piece.
Okay, so now we know that our client has been making good grades in school, but recently begun to get poorer grades. And kind of keeping in mind, we don't even know a presenting concern yet. So I'm wondering now what this might add in. Does this jive with some of the things that we already know about this client or have already assumed? Or is this challenging some of the things that we assume?
I think this just says that something happened. Something significant has happened. I mean, outside of the other things that.
Yeah.
Maybe
some kind of.
One thing that comes up for me is I'm wondering if something has changed at home that's making it more difficult for this client to study and work on schoolwork and focus on schoolwork when they're at home. Because we already know that bullying is occurring at school, which might impact how they're able to perform in school. But I'm wondering if something is shifting their focus outside of school as well that's impacting their grades. Anything else that this brings up for you? For any of you?
I'm gonna move this.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see this one.
Oh, it's mine. Just type something.
Yeah. Melanie said relationship with teachers, supportive and non-supportive.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. So are those teachers serving as mentors that are asking the student, hey, what's going on? How can I help you? Do you need some extra help? What is it that I can do to help you get back to where you were? Or are the teachers just considering her to be lazy and not really worrying about it?
Yeah. I'm wondering too, maybe how some cultural factors might be, if this is a client I haven't laid eyes on yet. I'm wondering, just being aware of the way that in educational settings, students from different cultures are stereotyped in different ways in this area. Whereas one student, teachers might be concerned that there's a trauma or something going on at home. Other teachers, based on a different student's culture, might say, the student is lazy, the student doesn't apply themselves, and that's what we expect from the student based on those assumptions. And so looking at that systemic picture. Let's go ahead and add another, just being mindful. And of course we can, this is creating a dynamic picture for us. And this will flash if anyone jumps in.
So your client wants to go to college in a large city. They want to move from the suburbs to a large city. Does that add anything to this for you all? Okay.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go for it.
You got
I'm just saying, I'm starting to relate some to this student, possibly to this client, as someone who grew up in a small town, who saw going to college in a big city as a way out of circumstances. And so I'm wondering, I know that's some countertransference coming up for me, that maybe this is a way to escape to somewhere where there might be more support, more access to resources. Or maybe this client is really into art, is really into music, and wants to be around a bigger art scene, or this is giving me a little bit of insight into that, I think.
Yeah, and for me, again, similar to Jordan, a little countertransference. If this child was bullied, they're not doing well in school, they might want to get away from all reminders of that hard part of their life, of the bullying, of the lack of acceptance, lack of inclusion, and go somewhere where they can just sort of start over. And that'll have, like Jordan said, a larger pool of people to pull from to build support. Also, we mentioned resources earlier. So I wonder if this is, in their mind, opportunity to get more resources than what they currently have access to, and more support systems than they currently have access to.
Definitely.
Any other thoughts?
I know for me, it's bringing up that there's some future thinking, that there's some hope there, that this student or this client is dealing with some tough stuff right now, possibly. There's bullying that we know is going on. We know that grades are suffering, so we have a feeling that some things are going on. But this client has a plan and has a hope for a future that might be a better future. And so that helps me to kind of think of the hope element and the future thinking, and might also give us some guidepost for how we move forward, and maybe even give us a glimpse at some of the goals that this client might want to set.
Right. And to me, if I'm seeing that the client is now making poorer grades, but is motivated to go to college, then we have that motivation that we can pull from. So we do have some form of intrinsic motivation that we can use in trying to get them back on track, if that is something that's important to them. All right.
So we've got another piece of information. We know that the client wants to be a teacher.
Yes. For me, that makes me wonder what their experience has been like with their teachers. Is there a certain teacher that inspires them to be a teacher because they want to emulate this teacher and do for another student, another child, what this teacher has done for them? Or is it the exact opposite? They haven't had good experiences with teachers and they want to be someone different that future students can lean on. They want to be what wasn't there for them and be what they needed for someone else.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I think there may be a clue in there too about some value system that we're starting to see of being a helper, being someone who cares about other people, some of the things we associate with people who are drawn to being teachers, or someone who values education and learning.
Right. And then I see that Lori has put, or is their mom a teacher, right? Some of us like to follow in our parents' footsteps. So that's definitely a possibility. Or is another influential individual in their life or in their community a teacher as well that's inspired them. Keisha, I believe you were about to say something earlier.
I was just going to read what Lori said.
Oh, okay, thanks. Great. Let's see what else we have. Our client is sexually active. So earlier when we found out their age, we mentioned sex, safe sex practices. So now that we have all this going on, grades are slipping, being bullied, single parent, wants to get away and go to college elsewhere. Is there anything else that them being sexually active kind of adds to all that in our conceptualization of them?
Yeah, I just think that's just teenage behavior. Natural teenage behavior.
Absolutely, yeah.
Normal.
Yeah, and Lori agreed. She said normal. I agree. Yes. I would say our only thing is making sure that this student this client has some form of access to sexual education, just so that they're making informed decisions.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering, being in a suburban area, maybe being in a situation with not having maybe access to all the resources, I'm wondering if there's access for this 15-year-old female to access sexual education and sexual resources on her terms, maybe through something like Planned Parenthood or a local or something like that, where she can get information that isn't coming through a parent or through a church or through a teacher that might have an agenda, that might have, is this student, I keep saying student, I mean client, is this client being empowered to make good choices and making their own choices as far as sex is concerned.
And kind of piggybacking off of what Jordan said, I know from my personal experience, a little more countertransference is that when I was in high school, when I was 15 in high school, the sex ed that we got in school was using scare tactics of this is why you shouldn't have sex, and very much pushing an abstinence agenda. So wondering what kind of information this client is receiving and how that sits with their value system as well. And I see Melanie has added to the chat. She said, has there been any abuse with mom being single and possibly different men in her life? Yeah, that's definitely something to explore as well.
Definitely. It makes me wonder, maybe since we were talking earlier that there might have been an event or a trauma of some kind, and wondering if maybe that it could be related to some kind of abuse. Is there an older person in the picture? Is there some kind of a reaction to some kind of sexual trauma or an assault? Maybe I'm wondering about that, and also just some very basic things like sexually transmitted infections. I'm thinking pregnancy. I'm thinking, is there possible that there's some concerns around that?
And kind of going back to what Melanie said, also making sure that at this point, since this is a big possibility, that we're using a trauma-informed approach when working with this client to err on the side of caution, just in case. Yeah. And also making sure there are resources available related to sexual trauma and abuse in general, so that our client does know this is a safe space to disclose that information. So that can be something as simple as having sexual violence awareness and intimate partner violence awareness resources in your lobby, a few pamphlets sitting in your waiting room where your clients enter, so she realizes, okay, this is something that I can speak freely about here. This is something that I can disclose to my clinician.
I think it's a good check-in too, especially for new clinicians, about your ethical requirements around what you're sharing with parents and what you're not sharing with parents. If there's abuse going on, this is a minor, so we know that we are called to report that to authorities and that there are ethical guidelines that we follow. But then also, I know I've encountered counselors and even my own instincts when I was first starting out about, maybe a 15-year-old client telling me, I'm sexually active, please don't tell my mother. And wondering, and we think we might be prepared for that question, but really maybe taking an opportunity to really hone in on where our ethical guidelines fall. Where do the guidelines of our informed consent and our agency, if we're working in a school, there might be, unfortunately, laws or school policies that could compel you to disclose that information. So just, this is always a caution when working with adolescents, that there are going to be times when you're going to have to make a decision as a clinician of acting in your client's best interest versus protecting your client's privacy.
Right. And for me, something that would raise if my client emphasizes, please don't tell my mom, is mom a safe place for this client emotionally, right? So even if mom is safe as far as the client's physical safety, that doesn't mean that she's a safe space for the client's emotional well-being. So kind of exploring that more with the client as well.
Or could mom be the aggressor? Mom might be the source of the trauma or the abuse.
Absolutely.
So, lots of questions come up.
Yeah, need to access for thoughts of suicide earlier in the sessions. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, going back to, I always think it's a good idea to have pamphlets of some sorts with community resources for those sorts of things in the lobby. That way it can kind of help open the discussion up for your clients. And yeah, especially if she's being bullied, now she's also sexually active. So yeah, if there is some form of trauma, then access for suicide prevention resources would also definitely be very important if we're thinking this might be trauma related. Good point, Melanie.
When I'm working with adolescents, that conversation for me starts from the very first session of letting them know that this is a space where we talk about that. We don't use euphemisms. We don't pretend like this isn't a problem. We don't try to run away from that. That if that's a concern, this is the space to bring that concern. And during our informed consent, we should always be talking to our clients about what disclosing that to us would look like. They need to know that, and that doesn't change because they're 15. It's the same for 15 or 50. So definitely, Melanie, that's a great point. That you're wanting to be assessing for those things, to be asking questions, being aware of some things, especially with adolescents. Let's just being mindful of time. Let's go ahead and we have our last bit of information, and definitely Melanie's saying self-abuse as well, self-harm. This is something I was actually surprised to see so much when I started working with adolescents, boys as well. And again, that was a stereotype I had to check going in, thinking that self-harm was a primarily female activity. I know that based on the research, we see it more often in females, but definitely I've seen it in male-presenting adolescents as well.
I have as well.
And so we know that we have our last bit of information from our intake, that this client recently came out as trans. And I'm wondering if this changes some of the things that you were thinking about, and some of the things that we talked about. Does this give some insight? Does this give a challenge? Does this, and honestly, does this make you uncomfortable? We need to have those conversations as clinicians. We need to be prepared to address the needs of all of our clients, no matter what. And so if this is bringing up some discomfort, this is a time to really explore that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, one thing that would come up with that is, okay, the grade change was recent. Them coming out was recent. Is that when the bullying started? Was there some sort of other trauma around the same time that has just compacted all of this and compelled them to seek treatment? Also, what's their support system looking like as far as them being trans? Is that part of their motivation for wanting to move away to a larger city? So just kind of going back and seeing how this part of their puzzle fits in with everything else. How might it be influencing other aspects of their life?
And I know Dr. Stretch probably has some insight into this, being the mother of a trans child. I'm wondering if there's something you'd like to add about clinicians and approaching with that new context that this is a young person who's trans.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, one of the main things that comes up, and it's just because it's one of my areas of specialty, is with technology, being aware that if you give this young person resources and they go home and they log into their home internet and they begin searching those resources, that when mom opens up her internet and starts looking at things, there's going to be related topics that are populating thanks to Google Analytics. And I think that's one way that this person's confidentiality could be violated without a clinician even thinking about it. Right. So, one of the things that I am very cautious about when I'm working with individuals in this situation is, especially if they're not ready to disclose, to mom, they may have come out to friends. Usually they come out to friends before they come out to parents. That this person needs the opportunity to explore that in a safe way and be educated on how to do that. And where to get positive and appropriate information. When my child had been out as gay for quite a time, but when they came out as trans, I was immediately, let's go to the LGBTQ center, let's find out about this, let's figure this out. And my child actually had to slow me down and be like, I'm not there yet, Mom. Slow down. You have too much information. So also being aware of not overwhelming, and really this is a very important place to meet your client where your client is and really test the waters with them about what do you need, what do you want. I have some resources. I don't want to overwhelm you. Let's pace ourselves. Those are two things that come to mind for me right off the bat.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. Absolutely. Making sure that we're not making this a harder process for them by overwhelming them, but also making sure that they're aware of ways to protect their own confidentiality and not force them to come out further sooner than they're ready for. Thank you so much, Lorianne.
I know that when we talk with clients about support systems, and I know I like to work from a holistic perspective. I know a lot of clinicians do as well. I'm thinking broader about this is a trans 15-year-old. Is she able to talk to her doctor about these things? Is she able to be honest with school personnel about the things that she needs? Where could I be an advocate? And this really goes to, and we're going to speak in the next section about some of the ways that we can be an advocate and be an ally for our trans clients, our LGBTQ plus clients, including trans clients, but definitely thinking about where those resources are being accessed. And what Dr. Stretch was saying was made me think too of experience that I've had when I was coming out as a young person and trying to access things. And this was in the very early days of the internet. The internet was brand new. But going to my public library and finding out that content was blocked by those. So even going to public libraries or using school computers to look up information might not even be an option because there might be parental controls on those. So wondering, does the LGBTQ Center have computers?
Yes. Yeah, and the other thing I've offered is my computer. So I've offered them my Mac to be able to explore, like they may come to session early or stay after session, and they can then use our computers. But I encourage them, don't log into anything that requires your password. You need to just use our computer for looking for information.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Great.
Let's move on, just being mindful of time, and we can continue these conversations as we move on. We want to debrief, and just a little caveat, when we do this activity in person, we break up into two groups, and the two groups get these pieces of information one at a time for the clients, but one group finds out first that the client is trans, and the other group doesn't find out until the end, because we wanted to see, how that would impact what we're thinking about, what we're conceptualizing, our stereotypes that we're bringing up, the challenges that are coming up.
What assumptions we have that play a role in conceptualizing.
Definitely, and we've been really pleasantly surprised by how open people are about talking about how this is changing the way that that people are approaching these situations. So I'm just curious how this activity was for everyone, if there were any things that kind of came up, and wondering if, considering that this person was trans and finding that out last, did that impact anything that you were thinking or how you might approach the client? I think the last time we did it, Bianca, you had the group that knew from the beginning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want to share maybe how that came up with the group that you worked with?
As they were exploring, as they gained more information, they would come back to how was this individual being trans impacting that part of their life and vice versa. So being that they knew from the jump, they were using a trauma-informed perspective from the beginning, and they kept coming back to support systems. That was the main thing, that no matter which part of information we share, they would come back to, and do they have support in this aspect of their life, especially being that they are trans and might not have support systems in that aspect of their life. So that was some of the things that came up a lot. in the group?
My group was the group that found out at the end that the client was trans. And some interesting things came up about kind of a reminder to us that a trans client, the presenting concern, may have nothing to do with the gender journey and the coming out process. That trans youth, specifically LGBTQ youth, deal with everything that every adolescent deals with. They deal with extra things. They deal with things maybe through a different perspective in a lot of ways. But there are some times that you'll have an LGBTQ plus adolescent sitting in front of you for whom the identity is not the central concern. And we can err as clinicians when we focus on places where the client's not needing us to focus or not wanting us to focus.
Yeah, and that was one aspect that I was also pleasantly surprised with my group, is that I had some members who kept saying, well, her being trans might not be the presenting issue. So maybe bullying is the presenting issue. Maybe trying to navigate going to college is the presenting issue. So while a lot of the group members kind of focused on, okay, she's trans, what role does that play with different aspects of the information they were gaining, I had, I think it was 1 or 2 group members who kept kind of grounding it back to, but her being trans might have nothing to do with this. That might not be something she wants to discuss. It might not be something that she's ready to explore. It might be something that isn't causing any concerns for her. So yeah, that's a good point, Jordan.
It came up in my group too that that last piece of information for us, that this client is a trans individual, is something that we might not ever find out. And so how does that impact the work that we do with all of our clients about how affirming we are, how gender expansive our language is, how we are positioning ourselves to create safe spaces for all of our clients, even when we know that they might not disclose this identity to us, and choose not to, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Bianca's reminding me of our time constraint. I know we could talk about this topic for hours
all
if
day.
you let us. So let's shift into the strategies section. And I think we've talked about some of these things, and we've come up with some great things. And of course, please chime in on anything else that you want to add from your own experience, or things that have even popped up as we've been talking today. I know that the number one strategy is always to become your client's advocate. Technically, this applies to every client, but we want to make sure that we are advocating for our client, that we're not becoming an extension of that bullying, unsupportive behavior that they're getting from other adults in their lives with youth. And this is for all youth. Are we putting mom and dad's agenda in place? Are we letting the community standards or the religious sensibilities of our community influence how we're working with a client? Are we truly being their advocate and really determining what they need and what they don't need from us? They may not need us to be an advocate in certain spaces, and we need to be aware of how we're moving forward in a way that respects their journey and their perspective.
Yeah. I mean, if we keep in mind our ethical codes, ACA ethical codes require that we do discuss with the client before we advocate on their behalf. So if we're advocating for the community, that's one thing, but if we're advocating for one individual, LGBTQ youth or a client, then it's important that we check in with them to see how advocating for them might impact them, and if that's something they want us to do, like Jordan said.
I just want to be mindful of, and also just when we talked about this extensively about not assuming the needs or goals of the client based on, and this really speaks, I think, to what Melanie was just saying. Why is the client there to see you? That should lead you, but consider the other factors, but focus on the issue brought to you. Definitely. Absolutely. We're not going to assume that because an adolescent is gay or lesbian, that their parents are not supportive, or that they don't have a supportive church environment. There are plenty of church environments that are very open and very affirming. As Dr. Stretch was pointing out, sometimes parents are even more excited about this identity than the adolescent. And so I know that being a gay kid in the 90s, was a very specific kind of experience. And I'm so glad to see young LGBTQ kiddos growing up with access to friends that are out, mentors, to being able to see themselves in movies and on TV shows and things that older generations didn't have, which is just really great, but then also realizing those limitations. We also want to make sure that all of our staff, everyone in your agency, everyone that encounters, this includes the people who call to get bills paid, the people who work the front desk, the cleaning crew, everyone has some training in multicultural competencies. We want our agencies to be safe spaces for everyone. This is easier to control in a private practice setting if you're in charge. A lot of us work in agencies where we're not calling the shots, and maybe there are some power structures in place that make it hard to advocate for this, but this is something that we want to do, starting with ourselves. And making your office as welcoming and inclusive as possible. This is a little redundant, but there is also kind of what Bianca was saying. Do you have literature in your waiting room? Do you have books in your lending library that are gender expansive, that are identity expansive? Do you have, if you work with smaller children, do you have dolls in your playroom that are gender neutral? Do you have mommy and mommy dolls and daddy dolls? Right. I mean, these are things that we can do to really make our places where we work as inclusive as possible. Are the bathrooms gender neutral?
Yeah.
Are they, sometimes we don't have a power over that. If we're working in a setting, we may not have, but do we know where there is a gender neutral single-use restroom that's available for clients that would need that?
Yeah. Another thing that comes to mind for me is how you decorate your office, right? So if you have images that, for whatever reason, are displayed in your office that display a couple, do you have some that also display same-sex couples? So just kind of being mindful of that sort of thing, and the little things that that might be considered microaggression to these clients as well. Also, when we go back to educating our office staff, make sure that your intake paperwork is affirming as well. Also making sure that whoever works your front desk and is going to be referring to them by name, making sure that you're using the name that this individual goes by, not a dead name. Making sure that paperwork that they have to sign and fill out has their current name, not a dead name on it as well.
Definitely. And we also want to be able to create connections in our community. Where are the resources? Where are the, if this is a client that would prefer to work with a queer identified counselor, do you know some in your referral network that maybe if a trans client would really like to work with a trans counselor, where they can find that might not be available in your community, but we don't know unless we look. Where are the resources? Where are the shelters that are trans affirming? Where are the support groups? And really learning about your community. I want to make sure that we're not over time.
Yes. And we're a minute away. Okay.
So as usual, whenever we give presentations, we go right up to the last second and leave no space for questions or anything. I know we've got to wrap up. And there are other sessions that people are wanting to get to. Dr. Stretch was saying, thank you so much. As a parental ally, sessions like this are essential to counselors supporting their clients ethically and in an informed way.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And Keisha's provided the link for the continuing education. Thank you, Melanie, for coming. Yes. Thank you, everyone who is watching, and to anyone who's watching this not live. Definitely, we would love to, I don't know if we provided a way to contact us, but definitely look at some of the resources and look into this, because this is important work.
Absolutely, and thank you all for the insight that you all have provided throughout this session as well. I appreciate all of your participation and the good points that you all have made as well.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Keisha. Thank you, Dr. Stretch.
Have a good one.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.